The first time I saw him, he was dying. Blood matted his golden fur, and his tiny chest rose and fell in shallow, desperate breaths. One of his back legs bent at an angle that made my stomach turn, and his dark eyes, those beautiful, trusting eyes, stared up at me with a mixture of pain and hope that I'll never forget. The dust from the explosion still hung in the air around us, mixing with the acrid smell of smoke. In that moment, crouched in the rubble of what used to be someone's home in Afghanistan, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. Speech balloon, I'd love to know. What time is it where you are right now? And which city or state are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. Because knowing you're listening to this story from wherever you are in the world makes it feel even more special. My name is Marcus, and I was 22 years old when I first deployed to Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne Division. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, I'd always dreamed of serving my country. My grandfather had served in World War II, my father in Vietnam, and it felt like my turn to carry on the family tradition. The day I left for basic training, my mother cried into my shoulder at the airport. My father shook my hand with that firm grip he'd taught me, but his eyes were glossy. They knew that the boy leaving might not be the same man who came home. Nothing could have prepared me for stepping off that transport plane in Kandahar. The heat hit me first, a wall of suffocating air like opening an oven door. Then came the smell, dust, diesel fuel, and something indefinable that I later learned was the scent of a place where too many people had died. Our forward operating base was a collection of concrete barriers and prefabricated buildings that looked like they'd been dropped from the sky. The local Afghan workers moved through our world like ghosts, their eyes holding stories we couldn't understand. I remember my first patrol vividly. We rolled out as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of home. The village was a cluster of mud brick houses connected by narrow alleyways carved by generations of feet. Children peeked at us from doorways, their eyes wide with curiosity and caution. This war was different from anything my grandfather or father had experienced. There were no clear battle lines, no obvious enemies. Every face could be friend or foe. Every pile of trash could hide an explosive device. The uncertainty was suffocating. But there was beauty too. The old man who offered me tea from a battered metal cup, smiling despite the language barrier. The little girl who waved shyly from behind her mother's robes. These moments kept me sane, reminding me that beneath all the conflict, there were just people trying to live their lives. 3 months into deployment, I'd been assigned to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's squad. Rodriguez was on his 3rd deployment, a tough guy from Texas who'd seen more combat than most people see in movies. He had a philosophy about war that stuck with me. In a place designed to strip away your humanity, the most important thing was finding ways to hold on to it. For me, that meant paying attention to small details others might miss. The way morning light turned the mountains purple, the sound of children laughing, exactly the same as children laughing anywhere in the world, the smell of bread baking in small ovens dotting the marketplace. It was during routine patrols that I first noticed the dogs. Afghanistan had thousands of strays, mixed breeds that had adapted to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. They were usually thin, wary creatures that kept their distance from humans. But something about these animals drew my attention. Maybe because I'd grown up with dogs back home. My family had always had at least one dog, usually a rescue from the local shelter that my mother couldn't resist bringing home. There was something honest about the way dogs looked at you, without agenda, without the complicated layers that made human interactions so difficult in a war zone. I started carrying extra food in my pack. When we'd stop during patrols, I'd toss scraps to any dogs I saw. Most would grab the food and run, but occasionally one would linger, watching me with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand more than they should. Rodriguez noticed what I was doing. "Marcus," he said one morning, "I see you feeding those strays. Be careful. Some carry diseases, and you don't want to get too attached. This place has a way of taking away everything you care about." I nodded, but kept feeding them anyway. Those small acts of kindness felt important, like they were keeping part of me alive that the war was trying to kill. The morning everything changed started like any other. We were preparing for a routine security patrol through the village. Intelligence had reported suspicious activity. Nothing specific, just the usual chatter that kept everyone on edge. I'd been in country for 4 months, long enough to know that routine patrols were never really routine. Every step outside the wire was a roll of the dice. Every corner turned a potential ambush. But you learned to function despite the fear. Our squad loaded into armored vehicles just after sunrise. Rodriguez rode in the lead vehicle. I was in the second truck with Corporal Johnson, Private Williams, and our interpreter Ahmad. Ahmad was a young Afghan man who'd been working with American forces for 2 years despite constant threats against his family. When we reached the village, everything seemed normal. The usual mud brick houses, narrow streets, constant dust coating everything. Children watched from doorways, some waving, others staring with the solemn expression Afghan children learned early. We dismounted and began our patrol on foot. Rodriguez took point, Johnson and Williams covered flanks, while Ahmad and I brought up the rear. Locals we encountered were polite but distant. It was about an hour into the patrol when we heard the first explosion. The sound came from the eastern edge of the village, a deep, rumbling boom that shook the ground. Rodriguez immediately got on the radio while we took defensive positions. The second explosion came 5 minutes later, closer this time. Close enough to see smoke rising above rooftops, close enough to smell burning metal and concrete, close enough to hear the screaming. Rodriguez's voice crackled through our headsets. ID attack on civilian housing. We're moving to provide assistance. Stay tight, stay alert, watch for secondary devices. We moved quickly through narrow streets toward the explosions. The smell grew stronger, smoke and dust, and something that made my stomach clench. The screaming had stopped, replaced by a silence that was somehow worse. When we turned the corner and saw the destruction, I felt something break inside my chest. What had been someone's home was now a pile of rubble and twisted metal. Walls had collapsed inward, bringing down the roof and trapping everything underneath. Dust still hung in the air like fog. But it wasn't the destruction that stopped my heart. It was the sound, a tiny, desperate whimpering coming from somewhere deep within the rubble. The whimpering was so faint I thought I was imagining it. My ears were ringing from the explosion, and dust made it hard to focus. But as I stood staring at the collapsed building, I heard it again, a soft, desperate sound that cut through all the chaos. Rodriguez was coordinating with base, calling for medical support. Johnson and Williams checked the perimeter. Ahmad talked to villagers who had gathered at a safe distance, their faces etched with shock and grief. But all I could focus on was that sound. I moved closer to the rubble pile, stepping carefully around concrete chunks and twisted metal. The whimpering seemed to come from near what used to be the back corner, where a small section of wall still partially stood. "Rodriguez," I called out. "There's something alive in here." He jogged over. "What do you hear?" I held up my hand for silence. For a moment there was nothing but distant vehicles and low murmur of villagers. Then it came again, that soft, heartbreaking whimper. "Could be a person," Rodriguez said quietly. "We need to be careful about structural integrity, but we can't leave someone trapped." I nodded, but something in my gut told me it wasn't a person. I'd heard enough human voices in distress to know the difference. This was something smaller, more vulnerable. We started moving rubble pieces, working slowly to avoid further collapse. Each concrete chunk revealed more destruction, broken furniture, scattered belongings, remnants of a shattered life. It took almost 20 minutes to work down to where the sound originated. My hands bled from handling rough concrete. Sweat poured down my face despite the morning coolness. But every time we paused, we could still hear that faint whimpering, urging us forward. And then I saw him. He was wedged between two large concrete pieces, in a space so small I couldn't believe anything could have survived. At first, all I could see was matted fur and one tiny paw, but as I carefully moved another debris piece, his face came into view. He was just a puppy, maybe 2 or 3 months old, with golden fur now caked with dust and blood. One back leg was clearly broken, twisted at an angle that made me wince. His breathing was shallow and rapid, and when he looked up at me with those dark, trusting eyes, I felt something shift in my chest. "Oh God," I whispered, reaching toward him as carefully as I could. "Hey there, little guy. It's okay. We're going to get you out of here." Rodriguez crouched beside me, his expression softening when he saw the puppy. Poor little bastard. Probably belonged to whoever lived here. The thought hit me like a physical blow. This puppy had been someone's pet, someone's companion. Maybe he'd belonged to one of the children who used to live in this house, had slept on their bed and played in their yard. Now his family was gone, and he was trapped, injured, and completely alone. I reached into the narrow space, moving as slowly and gently as possible. The puppy didn't try to bite or snap, didn't show fear or aggression you might expect from an injured animal. Instead, he seemed to understand that I was trying to help. When my fingers touched his fur, he made a soft sound that wasn't quite a whimper and wasn't quite a sigh. "Easy, boy," I murmured, working my hands under his small body. "I'm going to get you out of there, I promise." It took several minutes of careful maneuvering, but finally I lifted him free from the rubble. He was so light in my hands, so fragile and broken that I was afraid I might hurt him just by touching him. Blood had soaked through his fur on his left side, and his injured leg hung at an odd angle. But he was breathing. He was alive. And when I cradled him against my chest, he pressed his tiny head against my uniform and made that soft sound again. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he shook his head and sighed. "Marcus," he said, gentle but firm, "you know we can't take him back to base. We're soldiers, not veterinarians. The best thing we can do is put him out of his misery." I looked down at the puppy in my arms, at those trusting eyes starting to close from exhaustion and pain. The logical part of my brain knew Rodriguez was right. We were in a war zone, with limited medical supplies and no way to treat a seriously injured animal. The humane thing would be to end his suffering quickly. But something deeper than logic was speaking to me. Something about humanity and kindness and small acts of grace that keep us from becoming monsters. This puppy had survived an explosion that destroyed his home and killed his family. He'd been trapped in darkness for hours, alone and afraid and hurt, but he'd held on. He'd held on until someone came for him. How could I give up on him when he hadn't given up on himself? "No," I said quietly, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "We're not giving up on him." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Marcus, be realistic. What are you going to do with an injured puppy in a combat zone? We don't have resources to treat him, and regulations don't allow pets on base." I looked down at the small, warm body in my arms. The puppy had opened his eyes again and was looking up at me with an expression that seemed almost hopeful. His breathing had stabilized slightly, and though clearly in pain, there was something in his demeanor that suggested he was a fighter. "I'll figure it out," I said. "There has to be a veterinarian in Kandahar, someone who can help him. And as for regulations, maybe some rules are meant to be broken." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. I could see him weighing his options. Follow regulations and maintain discipline, or allow one of his soldiers to follow his heart in a place where hearts were usually the first casualty. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. You've got 24 hours to find a solution. If you can't get proper medical care for that dog by tomorrow night, we're going to have to make a hard decision. And Marcus? This stays between us for now. If Command finds out I'm letting you harbor an unauthorized animal, we'll both be in deep shit. I nodded gratefully, understanding the risk he was taking for me. Rodriguez was a good sergeant, the kind of leader who balanced military discipline with human compassion. He could have ordered me to leave the puppy behind, and I would have had no choice but to obey. Instead, he was giving me a chance to save a life, even though it could cost him his stripes if things went wrong. The ride back to base was tense. I kept the puppy hidden inside my body armor, pressed against my chest where his small heartbeat mingled with mine. Every bump made him whimper softly, and I found myself whispering reassurances that I wasn't sure I believed myself. It's going to be okay, I told him over and over. We're going to get you fixed up, and you're going to be fine. When we arrived at base, I waited until others had headed to debriefing before making my move. The puppy had fallen asleep against my chest, exhausted from pain and trauma. I was terrified that any sudden movement might wake him and cause him to cry out. I managed to slip into my barracks without being seen, and quickly cleared a space under my bunk where I could hide him temporarily. I used my spare blanket to make a soft bed, and placed a bowl of water nearby in case he woke up thirsty. As I knelt watching him sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths, I realized I had no idea what I was doing. I'd never cared for an injured animal before, had no medical training beyond basic first aid, and was operating in complete violation of military regulations. But looking at this small, helpless creature who had somehow survived the unsurvivable, I knew I couldn't turn back. That night, I snuck out to the communications tent. I had to find help, and I knew exactly who to call. My ex-girlfriend Sarah was a veterinary student back at Ohio State University. We'd broken up just before my deployment, not because we didn't care about each other, but because the distance and uncertainty of war made maintaining a relationship too difficult. But we'd parted on good terms, and I knew that if anyone would help me figure out how to save this puppy, it would be her. The international call took forever to connect, and when Sarah's sleepy voice finally came through the static-filled line, I realized I'd forgotten about the time difference. It was 3 in the morning in Ohio. "Marcus?" she said, instantly more alert. "Oh my God, are you okay? Is everything all right?" "I'm fine," I said quickly. "But I need your help with something, and I don't have much time to explain." I told her about the explosion, about finding the puppy in the rubble, about his injuries and my desperate need to help him. She listened without interruption, and when I finished, there was a long pause. "Okay," she said finally, her voice taking on the professional tone I remembered. "First things first, you need to assess the extent of his injuries. Can you tell me exactly what you're seeing?" For the next 20 minutes, Sarah walked me through a basic veterinary examination, using supplies I could scrounge from our medical kit. The puppy woke up during the process and whimpered when I touched his injured leg. But he didn't try to bite or struggle. It was almost as if he understood that I was trying to help. "The good news," Sarah said after I described what I was seeing, "is that he doesn't appear to have any internal injuries. The leg is definitely broken, but it's a clean break that should heal with proper care. The bad news is that he needs professional medical attention, antibiotics, pain medication, and proper splinting of that leg." "Where am I supposed to find a veterinarian in Afghanistan?" I asked, feeling hopeless. Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. There might be someone at the base who can help. Not necessarily a vet, but maybe a medic with animal experience. Or, she paused. "Marcus, this is going to sound crazy, but there are international aid organizations operating in Afghanistan. Some of them work with local communities to provide veterinary care for livestock and working animals. She gave me names of several organizations to look for and promised to send detailed care instructions via email. As we were about to hang up, she said something that stayed with me for the rest of my deployment. "Marcus," she said, her voice soft with emotion, "what you're doing is incredibly dangerous and probably stupid from a military standpoint. But it's also one of the most compassionate things I've ever heard of. That puppy is lucky you found him." After the call ended, I sat in the darkness of the communications tent for a long time. Was I being stupid? Probably. Was I risking my career and possibly my safety for an animal I'd known for less than 24 hours? Definitely. But when I thought about those trusting eyes looking up at me from the rubble, when I remembered the feel of his small body pressed against my chest during the ride back to base, I knew I didn't have a choice. Some decisions aren't made with your head. They're made with something deeper, something that connects you to every other living thing that's ever fought to survive against impossible odds. I named him Charlie that night, after my grandfather who'd served in World War II. Charlie Wilson had been a tough old soldier who'd survived the Battle of the Bulge and come home to build a life filled with love and laughter. If this little puppy had even half of Charlie Wilson's fighting spirit, he was going to make it. The next morning brought new challenges. Charlie had made it through the night, but his condition hadn't improved. The makeshift splint I'd fashioned for his leg seemed to be holding, but he was clearly in pain and hadn't eaten any of the food I'd offered him. More concerning, he seemed lethargic and kept closing his eyes for long periods. I knew I was running out of time. During morning chow, I casually asked around about veterinary care in the area, trying to sound like I was just making conversation. Most of my fellow soldiers looked at me like I was crazy. "Why the hell would you want to know about animal doctors?" Williams asked, shoveling eggs into his mouth. "You planning on adopting one of those mangy strays?" "Just curious," I said, forcing a laugh. "Saw some sick-looking animals in the village yesterday and wondered if anyone ever takes care of them." Johnson shrugged. "There's supposed to be some kind of aid group that comes through once in a while. Something about helping farmers with their livestock. But I've never seen them." My heart jumped. This had to be one of the organizations Sarah had mentioned. But how was I supposed to find them? The answer came from an unexpected source. Ahmad, our interpreter, had overheard our conversation and approached me after breakfast. "Sergeant Marcus," he said quietly, "you ask about animal doctor, yes?" I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral, just wondering if there are any in the area. Ahmad studied my face for a moment. "There is woman. She comes to villages with medicines for animals. Very good person, very kind. She helps my uncle's goats when they were sick." "Where can I find her?" I asked, probably too eagerly. Ahmad looked around to make sure no one else was listening. "She has clinic in Kandahar City, maybe 20 kilometers from here, but is dangerous journey, and your commanders will not permit." I felt my heart sink. Even if I could get permission to leave base, which was highly unlikely, how could I explain why I needed to visit a veterinary clinic? And how could I transport Charlie without revealing what I was doing? But Ahmad wasn't finished. He leaned closer and lowered his voice even further. "I have cousin who works at clinic. If you tell me what animal needs help, maybe I can bring medicine when I go to visit family." I stared at him, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. "Why would you do that?" I asked. Ahmad was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "During Taliban time," he said finally, "I had dog. Very good dog, very loyal. Taliban said dogs are unclean, said I must kill him, or they will kill my family. I could not protect him. I think about this every day." He looked directly at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that I recognized. The weight of regret, the burden of a choice that haunts you forever. If I can help save Animal now, he said, maybe I can forgive myself for Animal I could not save before. I felt tears prick at my eyes, and had to swallow hard before I could speak. I told him about Charlie, about finding him in the rubble, about his injuries and my desperate need to get him medical care. Ahmad listened intently, nodding occasionally and asking detailed questions about the puppy's condition. When I finished, he was quiet for several minutes thinking. Finally, he nodded decisively. I will go to clinic today, he said. I will tell Dr. Amira about puppy, and I will bring back medicine. But you must be very careful. If other soldiers discover what you do, it will be bad for both of us. That afternoon, while the rest of my squad was on patrol, I stayed behind on guard duty and waited for Ahmad to return. Charlie seemed weaker than he had that morning, and I was starting to panic that I'd waited too long to get help. I spent hours sitting beside my bunk, watching him breathe and whispering encouragement that I hoped he could hear. I told him about my family back home, about the farm where I'd grown up, about the dogs we'd had over the years and how much they'd meant to us. You're going to love Ohio, I told him. Lots of fields to run in, lots of squirrels to chase. My mom's going to spoil you rotten. She always did have a weakness for strays. As I said the words, I realized I was already planning a future for Charlie that extended far beyond Afghanistan. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd already decided that if we could save his life, I was going to find a way to bring him home with me. The logistics seemed impossible, but the certainty in my heart was absolute. Ahmad returned just before evening chow, and the relief on his face told me everything I needed to know before he said a word. Dr. Amira sends medicine, he said, pulling a small bag from his jacket. She says puppy will live if we follow instructions exactly. The bag contained antibiotics, pain medication, and proper materials for splinting Charlie's leg. There was also a detailed note written in broken English, explaining dosages and care instructions. But the most important thing in the bag was a small bottle of milk replacement formula and a tiny feeding syringe. Dr. Amira had recognized something I'd missed. Charlie was probably too young to have been fully weaned when the explosion occurred. He wasn't just injured and traumatized. He was also essentially an orphan who didn't know how to take care of himself. Following Dr. Amira's instructions, I prepared the first feeding and carefully lifted Charlie into my lap. He was so weak that his head lolled to one side, and for a moment I was terrified that we were too late. But when I gently placed the syringe against his lips and squeezed out a tiny amount of formula, his tongue moved instinctively to lap it up. His dark eyes opened and focused on my face, and I swear I saw recognition there, and gratitude. "Come on, Charlie," I whispered as he slowly took more of the formula. "That's it, buddy. You're going to be okay. We're going to take care of you." It took almost an hour to get a full feeding into him, but by the time I was finished, there was more alertness in his eyes and more strength in his movements. When I placed him back on his blanket, he actually lifted his head to look around before settling down to sleep. For the first time since I'd pulled him from the rubble, I allowed myself to believe that he was going to survive. Over the next 2 weeks, Charlie transformed from a broken, dying puppy into something that resembled a real dog. The antibiotics cleared up his infection, the pain medication allowed him to rest and heal, and the regular feedings filled out his tiny frame until he actually looked healthy. His leg was healing well, though he would always have a slight limp. Dr. Amira had sent word through Ahmad that this was normal for the type of break he'd sustained, and that it wouldn't prevent him from living a full, active life. But the most remarkable change was in his personality. The frightened, traumatized creature I'd pulled from the rubble had been replaced by a playful, affectionate puppy who greeted me with tail wags and excited whimpers every time I returned to the barracks. Keeping him hidden was becoming increasingly difficult. He was growing larger and more active, and his happy barks when he saw me were getting harder to muffle. Several of my bunkmates had started asking questions about the strange sounds coming from my area, and I was running out of excuses. It was Rodriguez who finally confronted me about it. I was returning from evening chow when I found him sitting on my bunk, with Charlie sleeping peacefully in his lap. My heart stopped, and I prepared for the worst: a formal reprimand, possible court-martial, the end of my military career. Instead, Rodriguez looked up at me and smiled. "He's a hell of a lot cuter than I expected," he said, gently scratching behind Charlie's ears. "And a hell of a lot healthier than when you first found him." I stood there speechless, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Relax, Marcus," Rodriguez said. "I've known about your little rescue project since day one. You think I don't notice when one of my soldiers is sneaking around, making international phone calls, and conspiring with our interpreter? I may be getting old, but I'm not blind." "Then why didn't you stop me?" I asked, still confused. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, watching Charlie sleep. "Because," he said finally, "I've been in this war for 3 tours, and I've seen what it does to good men. I've seen soldiers lose their humanity piece by piece until there's nothing left but anger and fear, and the desperate need to get home alive." He looked up at me then, his expression serious. "But you found something dying in the rubble and decided to save it, even though it could have cost you everything. That tells me you're still the same decent kid who left Ohio 6 months ago, and that gives me hope that you'll still be that decent kid when you go back home." I felt tears starting to form and blinked them back quickly. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now," Rodriguez said, "we figure out how to make this work officially. Because like it or not, that dog has become part of this squad, and we take care of our own." The next morning, Rodriguez called a squad meeting. I was terrified that he was going to expose my secret to everyone. But instead he presented Charlie as a morale-boosting measure that had been approved by higher command. "This is Charlie," he announced, holding the puppy up for everyone to see. "He's going to be our unofficial mascot for the remainder of our deployment. I don't want to hear any complaints about noise, mess, or extra work, because taking care of him is now part of our mission." Johnson raised his hand tentatively. "Sarge, are we actually allowed to have a dog on base?" Rodriguez fixed him with a stare that could have melted steel. "Johnson," he said, "are you questioning the wisdom of command?" "No, Sergeant," Johnson replied quickly. "Marcus is Charlie's primary handler," Rodriguez continued. "But everyone in this squad is responsible for his well-being. We're soldiers, but we're also human beings, and taking care of something helpless makes us better at both." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only was Rodriguez covering for me, he was turning my unauthorized rescue mission into an official squad responsibility. The risk he was taking was enormous. If anyone higher up the chain of command discovered the truth, his career would be over. But over the following days, something beautiful happened. Charlie became exactly what Rodriguez had said he would be: a morale booster for the entire squad. Soldiers who had been walking around with 1,000-yard stares started smiling when they saw him. Men who hadn't laughed in months found themselves chuckling at his puppy antics. Williams appointed himself Charlie's unofficial trainer and spent hours teaching him basic commands. Johnson became the squad's expert on canine nutrition and made sure Charlie was getting the proper balance of nutrients. Even other squads on base started taking notice. Soldiers would stop by our barracks just to see Charlie, and he seemed to sense that his job was to make everyone feel better. He would wag his tail and lick faces and generally spread joy in a place where joy was in very short supply. But it was during a particularly difficult mission that Charlie proved his real worth to our unit. We'd been tasked with searching a suspected weapons cache in a remote village, a mission that had everyone on edge because intelligence suggested the area was heavily booby-trapped. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Rodriguez made the decision to bring Charlie along, reasoning that his presence might help keep everyone calm and focused. It was an unconventional choice, but Rodriguez had never been one to follow convention when his soldiers' lives were at stake. The mission started routinely enough. We approached the village in our standard formation, dismounted our vehicles, and began the methodical process of searching buildings and interviewing locals. Charlie trotted along beside me, his leash attached to my belt, seeming to enjoy the change of scenery. It was when we were searching the third house that Charlie suddenly stopped and began whining. He planted his feet and refused to move forward. No matter how much I encouraged him, his hackles were raised, and he was staring intently at something I couldn't see. Rodriguez noticed the dog's behavior immediately. "What's wrong with him?" he asked. "I don't know," I replied, studying Charlie's body language. "He's never acted like this before." That was when Johnson, who was ahead of us, called out that he'd found something. Hidden beneath a pile of old blankets was an improvised explosive device, wired to detonate if anyone stepped on the floorboard directly in front of it. The exact spot where Charlie had refused to go. Our explosive ordnance disposal team later confirmed that the device contained enough explosive material to kill everyone within a 15-foot radius. If Charlie hadn't stopped us, at least 3 members of our squad would have died. Word of Charlie's life-saving intervention spread throughout the base within hours. Suddenly, having a mascot dog wasn't just a morale booster. It was a tactical advantage. Charlie had proven that his senses were sharper than any piece of equipment we carried, and his loyalty to our squad could literally mean the difference between life and death. Command's attitude toward Charlie changed overnight. What had been an unofficial tolerance became official approval, complete with paperwork designating him as a military working dog in training. It was a bureaucratic fiction, but it meant Charlie could stay with us without anyone having to worry about regulations. More importantly, it meant I could start planning for his future beyond Afghanistan. As the months passed, Charlie became more than just our squad mascot. He became the living heart of our unit. Every morning when we woke up, his excited greetings set the tone for the day. Every evening when we returned from patrol, his enthusiastic welcome reminded us that we'd made it through another day alive. But it was the quiet moments that meant the most to me. The nights when I couldn't sleep, haunted by the things I'd seen and done. Charlie would sense my distress and curl up beside me, his warm body a comforting presence in the darkness. He never judged, never questioned, never asked for explanations. He simply offered his presence as a gift. I started talking to him during those sleepless nights, telling him things I couldn't tell my fellow soldiers or my family back home. I told him about the fear that followed me everywhere, the way my hands shook sometimes when no one was looking, the nightmares that woke me in cold sweats. I told him about the guilt I felt for surviving when others hadn't, the weight of responsibility for keeping my squad safe, the growing certainty that I would never be the same person who had left Ohio almost a year ago. Charlie listened to all of it with those intelligent dark eyes, occasionally nuzzling my hand or resting his head on my chest. He couldn't offer solutions or advice, but he offered something more valuable: unconditional acceptance of exactly who I was in that moment, damaged and struggling and trying to hold myself together. Dr. Amira continued to send medicines and advice through Ahmad, and Charlie's health flourished under her remote care. His broken leg had healed completely, leaving only a slight limp that gave him a distinctive gait. His golden fur had grown back thick and lustrous, and he'd filled out into a medium-sized dog with intelligent eyes and an expressive face. More importantly, his personality had fully emerged. He was playful but not destructive, alert but not aggressive, friendly with everyone but clearly bonded to me above all others. He had an uncanny ability to read human emotions and respond appropriately, offering comfort to those who were sad, sharing in the joy of those who were happy, and somehow knowing when to simply be present without demanding attention. The other soldiers on base had adopted him as their own. He had a rotation of people who took him for walks, played fetch with him in the compound, and slipped him treats from the mess hall. But every night, he returned to sleep beside my bunk, and every morning, his first greeting was for me. It was during this period that I started seriously planning for Charlie's future after deployment. The process of bringing a dog back from Afghanistan to the United States was complicated and expensive, involving mountains of paperwork, veterinary certifications, quarantine periods, and international shipping arrangements. But I was determined to make it happen. I spent my limited internet time researching the requirements, reaching out to organizations that specialized in military pet transportation, and slowly accumulating the necessary documents. Sarah, my ex-girlfriend back in Ohio, had volunteered to help coordinate things on the American side. Despite the awkwardness of our past relationship, she understood what Charlie meant to me, even if she couldn't fully understand the experience that had created our bond. In her emails, she told me that she could hear something different in my voice when I talked about him. A warmth and hope that had been missing from our conversations about everything else. "He's saving you as much as you saved him," she wrote in one message. "I can tell from the way you write about him that he's given you something to focus on besides just surviving. He's given you a reason to believe in goodness again." She was right, though I hadn't fully realized it myself until she pointed it out. Charlie had become my anchor to the person I wanted to be rather than the person war was trying to make me. Every act of care I performed for him, feeding him, grooming him, playing with him, protecting him, was an act of resistance against the dehumanizing effects of combat. But our bond was tested when I received the news that would change everything. Rodriguez called me into his office on a Tuesday morning in March, his expression more serious than usual. I assumed it was about a mission briefing or some administrative matter. But when I saw the official documents on his desk, my heart sank. "We got our rotation orders," he said without preamble. "The unit ships out in 6 weeks. I felt the world tilt around me. 6 weeks, after more than a year in Afghanistan, after all the missions and firefights and close calls, we were finally going home. I should have been elated, should have been counting down the days like every other soldier in the unit. Instead, all I could think about was Charlie. "What about the dog?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, his expression sympathetic but realistic. "Marcus, I've let this go on because it was good for squad morale, and because Charlie proved his worth as an early warning system. But at the end of the day, he's still an unauthorized animal, and there's no way command is going to let you take him on a military transport back to the States." I felt panic rising in my chest. "But I've been working on the paperwork. There are organizations that help soldiers bring animals home. I can pay for private transport, arrange for all the veterinary requirements." Rodriguez held up his hand. "I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's not going to happen through military channels. If you want to get Charlie home, you're going to have to figure out how to do it on your own time, with your own resources, after your official deployment ends." The implications hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't leave Charlie behind. Not after everything we'd been through together. Not after he'd saved my life and the lives of my squad mates. Not after he'd become the most important relationship in my world. But I also couldn't abandon my unit, couldn't go AWOL or refuse deployment orders just to stay with a dog. Rodriguez seemed to read my thoughts. "There might be a way," he said quietly. "You've got leave time built up, more than most soldiers, because you've been here longer than the rest of the squad. If you could arrange for someone to take care of Charlie while you process his transport paperwork, you might be able to stay behind for a few extra weeks to get everything sorted out." It was a slim hope, but it was the only option I had. That night, I held Charlie close and tried to explain what was happening, even though I knew he couldn't understand the words. "We're going to figure this out," I told him, scratching behind his ears the way he liked. I'm not leaving you behind, I promise. Whatever it takes, we're going home together. Charlie looked up at me with those trusting eyes, his tail wagging slowly, and I made a vow that I would keep no matter what obstacles lay ahead. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of activity as I tried to accomplish the impossible. Arrange for Charlie's transport to the United States while still fulfilling my duties as a soldier preparing to redeploy. The logistics were staggering. Charlie needed a complete veterinary workup, including vaccinations, health certificates, and blood tests that could only be performed by certified veterinarians. He needed an import permit from the USDA, which required weeks of processing time. He needed a flight booking on one of the few airlines that transported animals internationally, with specific crate requirements and temperature restrictions. Most challenging of all, I needed someone in Afghanistan who could take care of him during the weeks or months it might take to arrange his transport. Ahmad became my lifeline during this period. His cousin who worked at Dr. Amira's clinic was able to arrange for Charlie's veterinary requirements, though it meant several dangerous trips into Kandahar City to transport him back and forth for appointments. Dr. Amira herself became an unexpected ally in my mission. When Ahmad explained what I was trying to do, she offered to provide temporary housing for Charlie at her clinic while his paperwork was processed. It was an incredible act of kindness from someone who had already done so much to help us. But the most surprising support came from my fellow soldiers. When word spread through the unit that I was trying to get Charlie home, donations started appearing in my bunk. $20 here, $50 there. Small amounts that represented significant sacrifices for soldiers who weren't exactly well paid. Johnson organized a poker game with the specific purpose of raising money for Charlie's transport. Williams started a betting pool on whether I'd actually succeed, with all proceeds going to the cause. Even soldiers from other units, men I barely knew, stopped by to contribute. Charlie had touched more lives than I'd realized, and the entire base seemed invested in his successful journey home. Rodriguez, meanwhile, was working behind the scenes to arrange for my extended leave. It wasn't easy. The military doesn't typically accommodate soldiers who want to stay behind to ship pets home. But he was calling in favors and navigating bureaucracy with the skill of someone who'd been playing the system for years. The breakthrough came 3 days before my unit was scheduled to depart. Rodriguez found me in the mess hall, his face wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "I got you 2 weeks," he said without preamble. 2 weeks of leave, starting the day after the unit flies out. After that, you're officially AWOL if you're not on a transport home. 2 weeks. It seemed like both an eternity and no time at all. 2 weeks to finalize Charlie's paperwork, arrange his transport, and somehow get him on a plane to the United States. What if it's not enough time? I asked. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "Then you'll have to make a choice," he said. "The dog or your military career." I looked across the mess hall to where Charlie was lying beside our table, contentedly chewing on a bone that Williams had saved for him from dinner. He looked up at me as if sensing my attention, his tail thumping against the floor in greeting. The choice had already been made, though I hadn't fully admitted it to myself until that moment. Charlie had saved my life in more ways than one. If it came down to choosing between him and my career, there was no contest. But I desperately hoped it wouldn't come to that. The night before my unit departed, Rodriguez gathered the squad for an unofficial farewell ceremony. We were sitting around our usual table in the mess hall, Charlie at my feet as always, when Rodriguez stood up and cleared his throat. "Gentlemen," he said, "over the past year we've been through hell together. We've lost friends, we've been scared, we've done things we never thought we'd have to do. But we've also done something remarkable. We've taken care of each other, and we've held on to our humanity in a place that tries to strip it away." He looked down at Charlie, who was gazing up at him with alert attention. "This dog represents the best of what we've accomplished here," he continued. Marcus found him broken and dying, and instead of walking away, he chose to save him. All of us chose to help save him, and in doing so, we saved something in ourselves. Rodriguez paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. Tomorrow, most of us get on a plane and go home to our families and our regular lives. But Marcus is staying behind to finish what we started. He's making sure that Charlie gets the same ticket home that the rest of us are getting. He raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To Charlie," he said, "and to the soldier who wouldn't leave him behind." The rest of the squad raised their cups, and for a moment the mess hall was quiet except for the sound of Charlie's tail thumping against the floor. The morning my unit departed was the loneliest I'd ever felt in my life. I stood on the tarmac, watching the transport plane disappear into the distance, carrying my brothers in arms back to their families, while I remained behind in a war zone with nothing but hope and determination. Charlie seemed to sense the significance of the moment. He pressed against my legs as we watched the plane disappear, offering what comfort he could to his human who was clearly distressed. But I didn't have time to wallow in self-pity. I had 2 weeks to accomplish a miracle, and every hour counted. Ahmad had arranged to meet me at Dr. Amira's clinic that afternoon, where we would finalize Charlie's medical documentation and discuss the logistics of his care during the transport process. The drive into Kandahar was nerve-wracking without my squad for backup, but Ahmad had assured me that his family connections would keep us safe. The clinic was smaller than I'd expected, a modest building with concrete walls and barred windows that looked more like a fortress than a medical facility. But inside, it was clean and well-organized, with modern equipment that seemed almost miraculous in this corner of Afghanistan. Dr. Amira was a petite woman in her 40s with kind eyes and gentle hands that immediately put Charlie at ease. She spoke excellent English, having studied veterinary medicine in Pakistan before returning to Afghanistan to serve her community. "Your dog is very healthy," she said after completing a thorough examination. "The leg has healed well, and his overall condition is excellent. You have taken very good care of him." I felt a surge of pride at her words. Charlie had come so far from the broken, dying puppy I'd pulled from the rubble. Now he was alert, playful, and clearly bonded to me in a way that spoke of trust and love. "The paperwork will be ready in 3 days," Dr. Amira continued. "But I must tell you, the process of shipping animals from Afghanistan is very complicated. Many things can go wrong, and sometimes dogs arrive sick or they do not arrive at all." I felt my heart skip a beat. "What do you mean?" She sighed, her expression sympathetic but realistic. "The airlines, the customs officials, the quarantine facilities. There are many people involved, and not all of them care about animal welfare. Dogs die in transport, especially when flights are delayed or connections are missed." The room seemed to spin around me. I'd been so focused on the logistics of getting Charlie approved for transport that I hadn't fully considered the risks involved in actually shipping him halfway around the world. "There is another option," Dr. Amira said quietly. "I have a colleague in Pakistan, in Islamabad. She runs sanctuary for rescued animals. If your dog could travel there by ground transport, the flight from Pakistan to America would be much safer, much more reliable." Ground transport across the Afghanistan-Pakistan border seemed almost as dangerous as air transport. But if it increased Charlie's chances of survival, I was willing to consider it. "How would that work?" I asked. "Ahmad would arrange transport with people he trusts," Dr. Amira explained. "It would take 2 days to reach Islamabad, but the roads are good and the crossing is routine for commercial traffic. Once there, my colleague could provide temporary care while international transport is arranged." It was another complication in an already impossibly complex plan, but it seemed like the best option available. I agreed to the Pakistan route, and Dr. Amira began making arrangements with her colleague in Islamabad. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, paperwork and desperate problem-solving. Every step forward seemed to create two new obstacles, and I was burning through my limited time at an alarming rate. On day 10 of my 2-week leave, disaster struck. The transport company that Ahmad had arranged to take Charlie to Pakistan called to say their truck had broken down, and they wouldn't be able to make the trip. It was too late to arrange alternative transport, and my leave was running out. I sat in my temporary quarters that night, holding Charlie and trying not to panic. I had 4 days left before I would officially be AWOL, and no viable plan for getting Charlie out of Afghanistan. That's when Ahmad made an offer that I'll never forget. "My brother drives truck to Pakistan every month," he said. "He carries supplies for my family's business. He could take Charlie on next trip." But he paused, looking uncomfortable. "But what?" I pressed. "Next trip is not for 3 weeks," he said. "You would have to trust me to take care of Charlie until then. And you would have to go home not knowing if you would make it." The thought of leaving Charlie behind was agonizing, but it was also my only remaining option. I could extend my leave and risk court-martial, or I could trust Ahmad to complete the mission I'd started. I looked down at Charlie, who was resting peacefully in my lap, completely unaware of the crisis swirling around him. He'd trusted me from the moment I pulled him from the rubble, trusted me to keep him safe and find him a home. Now I had to trust someone else to honor that commitment. "I'll do it," I said finally. "I'll trust you to get him home." Ahmad nodded solemnly. "I will not fail you," he said. "Charlie will reach America. I promise this to you." My last 3 days with Charlie were bittersweet. I knew that every moment we spent together might be our last, but I tried to make them count. We took long walks around the base, playing fetch and practicing the commands that Williams had taught him. I groomed his golden coat until it shone, trimmed his nails, and made sure he was in perfect health for the journey ahead. Most importantly, I tried to prepare him for my absence. I spent time with Ahmad, encouraging Charlie to bond with the man who would be responsible for his care over the next few weeks. Charlie was naturally friendly, but he was clearly confused by the change in routine. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay on my bunk with Charlie curled against my side, memorizing the feel of his fur, the sound of his breathing, the warmth of his small body pressed against mine. I told him everything I could think of about the journey ahead, about Ahmad and Dr. Rashida, and all the people who were going to help him reach home. I told him about the airplane ride and the strange sights and sounds he might encounter. Most importantly, I told him that no matter how long it took or how far apart we were, I would never stop working to bring him home. The morning of my departure arrived gray and overcast. I packed my gear with mechanical precision, trying not to think about the fact that Charlie wouldn't be coming with me. Ahmad arrived early, carrying a new collar and leash that his wife had bought for Charlie in the Kandahar market. The collar was leather with Charlie's name embossed in both English and Arabic. "He will wear this so everyone knows he is special dog," Ahmad said, fastening the collar around Charlie's neck. "Everyone will know he is loved." When the time came to leave, I knelt down and pulled Charlie into a fierce hug. He pressed his face against my neck, and I could feel his heart beating fast against my chest. "I love you, buddy," I whispered into his fur. "I love you more than I ever thought I could love anything. Don't give up on me, okay? Don't give up, because I'm never giving up on you." Ahmad gently took Charlie's leash from my hands. "I will send messages," he promised. "Every week, I will tell you how Charlie is doing. And when he is ready to travel, I will personally make sure he gets on plane to America." It took every ounce of willpower I possessed to turn around and walk toward the transport vehicle. Behind me, I could hear Charlie whining and pulling against his leash, trying to follow me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I had seen his face in that moment, I would have abandoned everything to stay with him. The flight home was the longest of my life. While my fellow soldiers around me celebrated their return to America, I stared out the window and wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But when the plane finally touched down in Dover, Delaware, and I stepped onto American soil for the first time in over a year, I made myself a promise. No matter how long it took, no matter how much it cost, no matter what obstacles arose, I was going to keep my word to Charlie. I was going to bring him home. 3 months later, Sarah met me at JFK Airport in New York, and seeing her again was both comforting and awkward. We'd maintained an email relationship throughout Charlie's rescue process, but we hadn't seen each other face to face since before my deployment. "You look tired," she said simply, pulling me into a hug. "I am tired," I admitted, "but we're almost there. Charlie's almost home." The airline employee approached us with a clipboard. "Are you Marcus Thompson? Here to claim one dog. Name of Charlie." I nodded, not trusting my voice to work properly. "He's been a model passenger," the employee said with a smile, "quiet as a mouse the whole flight. You've got yourself a special dog there." They brought Charlie's travel crate out on a loading cart, and my heart stopped when I saw it. The crate looked small and fragile under the harsh lights of the cargo terminal, and I couldn't see inside well enough to tell if Charlie was okay. But then I heard it, a soft whimpering that I recognized immediately. The same sound he'd made when I first found him in the rubble, but different now. Not desperate or afraid, but excited, hopeful. The cargo handler helped me open the crate, and suddenly Charlie was launching himself into my arms, his whole body wiggling with joy. He was bigger than when I'd left him, healthier and stronger, but his eyes were exactly the same. Those intelligent, trusting eyes that had captured my heart in a war zone. He covered my face with kisses, whimpering and crying, and trying to climb into my lap all at the same time. I buried my face in his golden fur and felt tears streaming down my cheeks. "I told you I'd bring you home," I whispered. "I told you we'd make it." Sarah was crying too, taking pictures and laughing at the reunion she'd helped orchestrate from thousands of miles away. The cargo handlers and other travelers stopped to watch, some of them taking out their phones to record the moment. But all I could focus on was Charlie. Charlie, who had traveled from a war zone to Pakistan to New York. Charlie, who had trusted me to keep my promise even when everything seemed impossible. Charlie, who was finally home. As we walked out of the airport together, Charlie trotting beside me on his leash with his distinctive slight limp, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. From a pile of rubble in Afghanistan to the streets of New York City, we had defied every odd and overcome every obstacle. But more than that, we had saved each other. I had given Charlie a second chance at life, and he had given me a reason to believe in hope again. In a place designed to strip away humanity, we had found it in each other. And now, finally, we were going home to Ohio together. Home to the farm where Charlie would run in open fields and chase squirrels and sleep in a warm bed every night. Home to a life filled with love and safety and the simple joy of being alive. The war was behind us now. Our real life was just beginning.